It's a truly singular experience sitting down to watch a Sergio Leone film. It takes no more than a few notes of an Ennio Morricone score and a handful of Leone's ultra-wide frames for me to get completely absorbed into his world of gunslingers and outlaws. No one did it like Leone, and no one has really come close since. His style is so iconic and distinct that, whenever another filmmaker is paying homage, it becomes immediately recognisable. Whether it's in Star Wars,
Oh, I don't think so.
John Wick, or basically every other shot in a Tarantino film, his influence has manifested itself across the entire medium. All of Leone's films are good, but there's something so special about those first 4 spaghetti westerns in A Fistful of Dollars.
Get 3 coffins ready.
For a few dollars more. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And Once Upon a Time in the West. Each one more epic and grandiose than the last, and each containing Leone's signature operatic standoffs.
Now we start.
It feels impossible to talk about any aspect of Sergio Leone's films without adding Ennio Morricone's name to the end of the sentence, because whilst it was Leone who redefined the look of the Western genre, it was Morricone who reinvented how they sounded. If you've seen any of the westerns from the classical Hollywood era, you'll know that most of the scores have a pretty similar sound. They're all front-loaded with these swelling orchestral strings meant to evoke the sentimentality, romanticism and adventure of the West. You can hear this in Max Steiner's opening piece for The Searchers. God, I love that shot. Compare that to the way Morricone opens Leone's first western, A Fistful of Dollars. Morricone's score feels gritty and primitive. It's full of cracking whips, grunts, anvils, electric guitars, and a whistled melody, all of which create a soundscape for a West which feels more cynical and almost immediately distinguishes itself from everything that came before it. The piece you're hearing is Dmitri Tiomkin's score for Rio Bravo, and it's essentially the basis for what Leone wanted his westerns to sound like. He was originally going to use the piece for the climactic showdown at the end of A Fistful of Dollars, but Morricone was eventually allowed to compose an original piece on the grounds that it would sound similar to the Degeo. The result is a near replica, but something the original lacked, which Morricone added through a change in structure, was an increasing sense of intensity. Within the scene, there are 3 key moments which Morricone's score dramatically emphasises with a sense of build-up and a rise in intensity. There's the initial explosion, where the music starts at a relatively low level of volume and intensity as the characters try and figure out what's happened. Then there's the smoke clearing to reveal the man, where the music has a slight variation on the previous section to match the rise in tension as it begins to crescendo with higher and louder notes being played. And then there's the initiation of the standoff, where the characters start moving into position and the music gets to its loudest and most dramatic point. Each moment perfectly cued and perfectly arranged to elevate these scenes and these characters into an almost mythical stature. This moment is just one of the 100 examples in these films where the sound and imagery are in perfect harmony. Morricone's music isn't just placed on top of the film in post, it's embedded into every single frame to the point where they become inseparable. Leone has some of the most indelible imagery in the medium, but without Morricone's music, this is just a guy running through a graveyard. But with it, it's the most epic run of all time. This doesn't just happen by accident though. Part of Leone's talent as a director was how he designed his films to be in harmony with Morricone's music. He did this by having Morricone complete the music for the film before the shooting began, allowing for specific scenes and even specific shots to be coordinated to Morricone's compositions. The most obvious example of this in effect is found in this scene from Once Upon a Time in the West. Watch the camera, listen for the crescendo. A similar thing happens in the grand finale of the film, where it almost feels like Morricone and the character of harmonica, played by Charles Bronson, initiate the standoff in tandem. Talking about the audio-visual synergy, look at how Leone cuts on each specific note here. It goes even further when you realise that the electric guitar and the harmonica in this piece were both previously established leitmotifs for the two characters, where they're now clashing both audibly and narratively. And again, we hear that same sense of progression on cue with the different stages of build-up. There's the beginning of the standoff, as we've just seen, and then as Henry Fonda's Frank removes his jacket to stand opposed, Morricone replaces the guitar melody with some strings and injects some operatic vocals into the composition. But where Leone's genius comes into play is not just in how he understands the effect Morricone's music can have on a scene, but also in understanding that, in its absence, a moment can be just as effective. Because for all of the drawn-out build-up that these standoffs get, it's the silence after the trigger's pulled that brings these larger-than-life spectacles back to reality. The opening to Once Upon a Time in the West is my favourite example of Leone using silence as a dramatic tool, where he departs from the usual opening credit sequences of his previous three westerns and instead opts to start the film in near silence as three gunslingers take over a train station. The details as to what these men are doing is something that Leone lets us chew over for the next 10 minutes, whilst he focuses our attention on the naturalistic soundscape of the station with the incessant sounds of a squeaking wind turbine, water dripping from the ceiling, and the buzzing of a fly. In classic Leone fashion though, that long period of silence is eventually broken up with the arrival of a train, as we get introduced to the character of harmonica. Who, by the way, gets one of the coolest lines ever.
Looks like we're shy of one horse.
You brought too many.
Also, just look at that blocking. Leone's compositions were never anything other than perfect, and he was competing within a genre full to the brim with iconic imagery, with the likes of John Ford, Howard Hawks, and Anthony Mann composing some of the greatest shots of all time. But what was so special about Leone was that he would shoot those stunning John Ford-esque vistas, but then juxtapose them against the extreme close-ups of his characters' faces, creating this constant sense of scale, particularly in these standoffs where Leone really pushes the faces to the edge of the frame as the characters size each other up. And here's the thing about Leone, he loves to do these big, long operatic build-ups for these set pieces, but when the violence actually ensues, it's over almost instantaneously. Once Upon a Time in the West for me is Leone's best film, but it's hard to deny that The Standoff in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is Leone's crowning achievement as a director. There aren't many scenes in the medium as masterfully constructed and as purely exhilarating as this one. It starts as they all do. A wide establishing shot to provide geography, in this case a circular gladiatorial arena, in the middle of a cemetery no less. Once the stage is set and Morricone's incredible score dies down, Leone cuts between 65 different shots in 190 seconds, averaging around 2.8 seconds for each cut. Its construct is deceptively simple, but there's an extremely precise approach to the editing of this sequence, because cutting every 2.8 seconds for near on 3 minutes wouldn't make for a very exciting sequence. Because what's so important about the editing here is creating rhythm. If the shots hold for too long, it gets boring, but if they're cut too quickly, then that tension you're trying to build becomes unsustainable for anything longer than a handful of seconds. So, Leone paces the scene to essentially give it a sort of visual crescendo, with the earlier shots in the sequence lasting between 3 and 5 seconds as they progressively get shorter and shorter, until the rapid-fire montage at the end where the cuts are happening 1 or 2 times a second. When you actually break down the editing, you really get a sense of how calculated its construction is, because most of the scene can be broken down into triads of shots. Once the characters have got into positions, Leone starts with 3 medium shots, where he matches their eye lines with the cutting. Then he gives us an over-the-shoulder shot from each of the characters' perspective to establish where the trio are in relation to each other. Then we see a close-up of each of the trio's weapons, and then the pattern essentially repeats itself, but with a focus now on the only 2 things that matter: faces and guns. The editing also subtly reveals the thought process of the characters based on who appears in the highest number of shots. Blondie, who we know in retrospect is in complete control of the situation, only appears in 18 of the shots, knowing he has to only focus on Angel Eyes, as Tuco isn't a problem because his gun isn't loaded. Angel Eyes, on the other hand, features in 28 of the shots, the most out of any character, despite being in the film the least. He has the most to lose out of the trio, and you can actually see this in the way Leone constantly cuts back to the character, visualising himself second-guessing. You can also see this in the way the camera is positioned, meaning Angel Eyes has to look left and right, as opposed to Blondie and Tuco, who stare at each other almost straight down the lens. And I think that's what makes Leone one of the greatest directors of all time. It's the ability to make these edge-of-your-seat set pieces, whilst also allowing them to reveal character and be emotionally engaging for the audience beyond the spectacle. In many ways, just trying to define what makes them so good is an impossible task, because these moments are emblematic of everything which makes Leone's entire filmography so special. It's every line of dialogue, every close-up, every musical cue, every unpredictable twist and turn, all of it is just working in perfect harmony, and hopefully this video captured just a little bit of that. If you haven't seen them, watch them. If you've already seen them, watch them all over again, because it doesn't get better than this.